Welcome back. We're here for week 4. Well, it should be week 4. We missed last week for the Northern Trust because, frankly, we have lives, and I was in Florida for work, and I didn't have any time to film this fucking deal. So we didn't film anything. But needless to say, we did participate in the DraftKings tournaments. Quick recap for us last week. Obviously, Bryson DeChambeau makes a run, wins the title. There was some guys, if you go on social media like Twitter and check any of the talking heads or the guys that do regular DFS, some guys made out huge, especially in straight up bets. I think Bryson was 80 to 1.
80 to 1.
And so a lot of guys cashed tickets there. And I think that's one of those things we talk about from time to time. We don't necessarily go into betting, but when you see a number that's wrong, whether it's a DraftKings price or a guy's odd, you got to jump on that number and don't be afraid to pound that number multiple times. You know, it's not unlike, and I don't want to get too far ahead, but there are guys this week when I did my first analysis of the pricing that I felt were mispriced, right? So again, before we go that way, quick recap, Northern Trust. I was ended up recouping about 50% of what I was in for my total investment. I had Bryson in some lineups, paired with Finau, unsuccessful of getting a 6-6 through, but because of my tournament choice, I was able to recoup some of my money, and a 5-6 lineup cashed in multiple lineups. What about you last week, Mike?
Yeah, unfortunately for me, I went into those small, that's been my new strategy lately, is going into these smaller GPPs,
Yep.
400 people, larger payouts, larger entry fee. And unfortunately, this week, the Euros let me down. Guys like Justin Rose, Molinari, and Sink let us down too. But those two big guys, if they make it through, I probably get a little bit back. Now the good thing is I didn't have any DeChambeau on my initial lineups, but I played some weekend golf, threw DeChambeau in there, and actually paid off nicely because he had a huge day on Saturday, and I got a little bit back on the weekend. So
but that's a strategy that you've had success with all week, or I should say all year, where it's like, hey, if you hit and miss with guys in your initial assessment and your big tournaments that you're playing, your classics as the DraftKings like to call them, if you miss, don't be afraid to double down on weekend events because, again, your odds are better. There is no missed cut. You've just got to make sure you're making smart choices. That's where data tools like Fantasy Golf National and Fantasy Golf Metrics can help you zero in on guys and make good choices for those weekend tournaments because there is cash to be won, and typically the pool of players that you're competing against is much smaller in those second chance tournaments than it is up front.
Yeah, they have the large ones, but again, I try to stick to those smaller ones. Again, your odds are always better there. You all know that. And that's where the data does really pay off.
So this week, as we transition, we've got the Dell Technologies Championship, week 2 of the FedEx Cup Championship. Much smaller field, right? 100 guys, 2 guys out, Molinari's out, Ricky's still dealing with an oblique injury of some form or fashion. So we're down to 98. Potentially, like last week, you could have 80 guys make the cut. So it's going to be much more like an Invitational or WGC where you've got a tight core of guys, and it's really more not about getting 6 of 6 through because it's almost a given that you're going to get 6 of 6. But the 6 guys that you pick need to be scorers this week.
Big time, yeah. You get 6 of 6 through, no guarantee you're going to cash this week. You've got to have those scores. So that's what we'll be targeting.
Yeah, and so we talk a little bit. The course, TPC Boston, it's up in the northeast portion of the country, as you would imagine, based off of the name. The course, on average, plays a little bit easier than some of the regular courses, where it's a little bit easier to hit fairways. You're going to find a higher regularity of greens in regulation. And so guys who typically have less control of the ball off the tee or even on approach are going to find success this week. So you're going to see a lot of people gravitate towards your ball strikers and, of course, your bombers, right? They want distance. Many of the par 5s play 450 to 500 yards. So scoring in those metrics will be important. I think the big thing, right, when we look at the course, it's a little bit easier than the average course on tour. So when we hone in on those scoring metrics, for me this week, I'm looking at par 4 scoring, par 5 scoring. I want birdie or better. I want guys that are going to get after it. And, of course, a key metric that seems to pop up, especially the last 3 or 4 weeks, has been approach, right? I want guys that are going to be on the green with a chance to score. As far as par 5s go, these par 5s are going to play a little bit easier, so there's better opportunities for eagle than compared to other courses on tour. So birdie, I wouldn't necessarily say is a given, but a par on a par 5 is going to play more like a bogey this week.
Yeah, exactly.
So I think the big thing is those scoring metrics will be very important. So when you start honing in the guys that you want to look at, it'll be important to find those guys that can put up big numbers. Historically on this course, guys have been in that 13 to 17 under as far as the winning number. So again, I can't belabor that point enough. You want guys that can go low. You want guys that can put up red figures.
Yeah, something tells me, and this year just seems to be these guys are scoring more.
Oh yeah,
I expect this to be, honestly, if the weather holds up, I'm approaching 20. I really expect someone to be up around that range.
And that is an important distinction. The weather this week, they're calling for rain 3 out of the 4 days. So again, that could soften conditions. It could delay the tournaments. We've seen that the last 3 or 4 weeks, especially as we've moved to the eastern part of the country where weather does play an issue. There's no significant wind forecasted for any 4 of the days. But I think Friday, Saturday, Sunday, and Monday, again, this is a delayed tournament that will finish on Labor Day, right? I think the big thing is rain could play a factor, which again could lead to those guys, those bombers who hit the ball a long way, having better scoring opportunities. Balls are going to stick on greens. The greens tend to roll a little bit faster, but if we've got rain, that could slow some of that down and help even the worst putters in the field. Historically, the course, the key metrics where guys who have won, approach has been number 1, strong putting, but again, putting is one of those things that can flip on or off from week to week. And then again, par 5 scoring. Now, when we talk about the actual field, the guys that are in here, DJ's at the top of the board at 11-6. My first inclination in looking at this, because it is a small field, and I'm relating it back to, like I said, a WGC, I think what you're going to have is a lot of people go stars and scrubs, because the scrubs, the guys that are priced in the low 7s and sub 7,000 numbers, they're not your typical scrubs, right?
Oh, absolutely.
You've got some guys down there. We've talked about him, guys like Chris Kirk. You've got guys like Charlie Hoffman, Kevin Na, who've had success, who've done well, guys that have been priced far above that are at a steep discount this week because the field is so small.
Yeah, stars and scrubs, I mean, and you mentioned it earlier, there's only 98 people in this field. 70 of the 98 are getting through, potentially with ties up around 80 like last week.
Yep.
So, I mean, why not take a shot with stars and scrubs? Best opportunity you're going to have all year for the most part. There isn't a cut or there isn't a field with a smaller group of people. I think the Masters was around a little bit of around 100 as well.
Yep.
But yeah, you're not going to have a smaller field to deal with than this one. So stars and scrubs. Again, my approach though, I like to stay more balanced, and there's a lot of guys in that 8K range that I'm going to try to hone in on. But man, it's going to be hard. I mean, well, I don't want to get too far ahead of ourselves, but it's going to be hard not taking some of those guys up top, which we normally don't.
Yeah.
We kind of stay away from those 10K and above guys. It's rare when we go there, but this is a week that might want to go there. So I don't know. I still haven't honed in yet quite on the guys I'm going to go with. I do have some ideas, but it'll be hard to stay away from them.
Yeah, I mean, philosophically, we've talked about it week to week. When we're discussing guys, when we're talking about ownership, when we're discussing strategies, typically we're talking about GPPs. We're talking about putting in 20 lineups, so shares, percentages. That's all based off of that 20 lineup metric. The other thing that you want to think about is, for us, we tend to gravitate away from the top of the field, right? You invest so much money, so much equity in that top guy when you're above $11,000. It really forces you to construct lineups that you don't have a lot of confidence in. This week may be one of those weeks where we see that flip a little bit for the majority of people that are playing. When you can go down into, sub $6,400 and find a name that you have a decent amount of confidence in, and again, don't want to jump too far ahead, but guys like Joel Dahman at the minimum 6,400. Yeah. Joel Dahman was a chalk guy last week. He missed the cut, and it might have exposed that the guy's been performing because he's been playing against weaker fields. But he's a guy that a week, 2-3 weeks ago was in the higher 7 to low 8s range, and now he's at the minimum price. So stars and scrubs is a relative term, but I imagine because you've got options like that at the low price points that people will try to construct lineups. I do think that people will stay away from DJ because he is so highly priced. Justin Thomas is the guy that won this tournament last year, and so I think folks may end up, if I'm to pick one or two, DJ or JT, I think more people will end up owning Justin Thomas just based off his course history. But in terms of metrics, I mean, DJ and Justin Thomas are 1 and 2.
1 and 2 on my model.
Yeah, and so talk a little bit, Mike, about your model, the guys that you looked at. When you started constructing this, which guys popped for you?
All right, well, obviously the 1 and 2 that you just talked about, but surprisingly, and it isn't a surprise, this guy's always been a great ball striker. Tee degree game's been phenomenal, but his putting has suffered. But now that he's gone back to the long putter, Mr. Adam Scott. at 9,400. It may seem a little pricey because we're used to getting him for a while there. We're getting him in the 7s, low 8s, 9,400. I'm not scared to go there. This guy's always had that great ball striking, and now his putting's coming back, and he's comfortable with that long putter. We've known that. So guys like him, Tiger, again, I think for his pricing, he's popping him out. He's number 4 in my model, but I think he's going to be pretty chalky. And I did go to Tiger last week, and he kind of let me down. I don't know if Tiger just shows up normally on the weekend when Tiger makes the cut, he's one of your top scorers. This was not the case this past week, and maybe he only likes to show up for majors. I don't know.
Well, I mean, two guys right there, stark contrast in how they finished. If you look at all the metrics other than putting, basically identical. Adam Scott and Tiger Woods, the big difference was putting. Tiger was absolutely atrocious on the greens. He couldn't sink putts. You know, he was missing 4 and 5 footers, and so the guy was escaping with pars. Where Adam Scott, now that he's got the cheater stick again, whether or not he's anchoring, I think is fully up to debate. But you know, you brought it up. He's a guy that has always had the ball striking component. He's a guy that's very good on approach, and he was just missing the putting, and now that's all of a sudden caught fire. For me, it's tough because Adam Scott, over the course of the last 6 to 8 weeks, has been a guy that we've seen in the sub $7,000 range, right? He's been anywhere between, not sub 7, but sub 8, anywhere between $7,800 and $7,400. And so now, based off his recency, you've seen his price jump to $7,400. He has immaculate course history here. I think he's 11 of 12 events that he's played here. His average finishing position is inside the top 30. So even when he wasn't playing fantastic, when his form wasn't as good as it was now, he's had success at this course. So I would imagine, based off his price at $9,400, he's probably going to be a little chalky. Tiger's always going to garner ownership. What do you think about a guy like Justin Rose? Obviously, Rose, you had him last week. You got burned by him. There's some lingering injury issues that folks have kind of thrown out there. But again, when we look at his metrics, where he sucked was on the greens. He was hitting fairways. He had good GIR. He had good proximity. The guy just couldn't sink a fucking putt.
Yeah, I mean, he definitely burned me. If you would have told me pick one of the guys you think is going to miss the cut, he would have been the last guy I chose. And he just hasn't been the same. Ever since he withdrew for some back spasms a few tournaments ago, he did play the next tournament after that. But again, he hasn't been the same. I mean, he was on fire all year, consistent. Everyone picks him for all the tournaments, especially all the majors. He hasn't come through, but he's competed. And I don't know, at 9,300, I think I might go back to the well again. We always like to try to give a guy a second shot.
Yeah.
He's definitely an elite talent, and we know what he can do. And for that price, and maybe people are off him because of what he just did, you might get him under-owned a little bit.
Yeah.
And then Cantlay at 9,000. Another guy talking about Scott, his price being bumped up.
Yeah.
Cantlay's been just
similar pricing. Yeah.
Consistently going up and up. But, you know, this guy has a little bit to play for. We're talking Ryder Cup here.
Yep.
He's not a guaranteed spot on the Ryder Cup, at least last I heard.
Yeah.
And so he's got some extra incentive. And he played great last week. I had no problem. I played him in my lineup. He came through for me, one of the few guys. So I'm not afraid at that $9,000 price point.
Yeah, you know, it's interesting. For me, you know, I have to make some decisions. You know, if I'm going to play Adam Scott, if I'm going to pay up for Scott, right, pay the premium for recency, I don't know if I can do that on another guy like Cantlay. So what I'll probably end up doing in my lineup construction is I'll end up going to a guy where I think there's extreme value. Two guys for me just below those marks that show phenomenal value based off of the quality of golfer and the recency is Tommy Fleetwood and Patrick Reed. Fleetwood, a little more consistent. We lack some of the data metrics because he is a Euro player, and so we don't have some of those built into our models. But you talk about a guy who every single week he has that one round where he goes out and absolutely lights the world on fire. On the contrast, he always has that round where he kind of shits the bed, and then all of a sudden he finishes, you know, T20 or T18 where he was in the top 5 a week ago. Patrick Reed is a totally different guy, a guy that started off the year soft, heated up, won the Masters, played well for a stretch, and then has not necessarily been a roller coaster ride, but he's kind of been hovering between T15 and T40 depending on the field. But both guys priced at $8,500 and $8,400. To me, there's significant value. I will probably have significant ownership in both Tommy Fleetwood and Patrick Reed because there is a lot of value in both guys.
I'm a huge Fleetwood fan, and to get him at this price point, he's popping on my model as well. He's number 13 on my model. So I will definitely have some shares of him. Reed, big on Reed ever since the his Masters win. But then after that, there's something going on with him. I don't know what it is. He's not actually rating out well in my model. I don't know how he is for you, but this week he's rating out 47th in my model, and that mostly has to do with basically his last 12 weeks and last 24 weeks key stats. He's got some decent course history here, and the corollary courses that I used, he's also doing all right there. He's number 16 in the course history and 28th in the corollary courses I used. So course history's okay. It's not like at the top. So I'm gonna stay away from Reed. What do you think about DeChambeau? Here's a guy at 8,700 just coming off a win. Do you go back to the well?
I like DeChambeau strictly from pricing and differentiating your lineups, right? Because he just won last week, a lot of folks don't like to go back there, right? It's a little bit different of a scenario where, again, we talked about Ryder Cup. He may have solidified his slot for the Ryder Cup by winning last week, but this is also the FedEx Cup playoffs, and he's the number one guy in FedEx rankings right now. So if he competes and finishes T25, he continues to probably hold that spot unless another guy in the top 10 happens to win this week. So I don't think the letdown potential that exists during the regular course of the year is necessarily there this time. I love him in GPPs. I also like him in cash because I think he will make the cut. I think he will score. And again, I don't think his ownership is going to be very high this week compared to where he was last week or even during the regular course of the year.
I kind of think it will be only because a guy you get that recency bias where he just comes off a win. He's actually been pretty great all year. And then I don't know if you follow the FedEx over the years, whoever gets hot going into the FedEx, we've seen Horschel do it a few years back. Whoever gets hot and he's one of those guys, and I would keep riding him as well. So, but again, I differ with you on. I think he will be chalky. I'm going to say upwards of close to 20%. What do you think he'll be in at?
I think he's going to be closer to that 12 to 13% mark, and I think it's just that a lot of folks have this bugaboo with taking guys 2 weeks in a row, especially after they win.
I do usually.
Yeah, absolutely. It's a kiss of death for you.
But it's burned me enough that I'm like, and again, what you just said, the FedEx is different than they're in the regular.
I mean, in terms of key metrics, some of the stats that we talked about, Bryson in approach, he's number 11 in the field. Okay, so he's top 15 in that. Putting, he's ranked 24th. So again, in terms of where he is in those key metrics he identified, par 5 scoring, he's 38th. He measures up. So I would say if DeChambeau is a guy that you're looking at targeting, there's nothing that's happened based off of last week that would scare me away from him. If anything, I'd be more than happy to double down back on him this week at $8,700. Another guy that a lot of folks have been mentioning this week is Matsuyama. He's $8,900. He's a guy, again, when you think approach guys, you think of guys who are not necessarily bombers but have good distance, guys that basically are good in all metrics except putting. Matsuyama's one of those guys, and it kind of feels like he's due, right? He seems to win a tournament every year. He wins like a WGC or one of these smaller field events. He competes in the Masters every year. So again, he's one of those guys, at least from a field perspective, my gut's telling me it might be a good time to go back to Matsuyama.
Totally agree with you. He's number 6 on my model. I also think he's in that price point where I think you're going to get him at a lower ownership. And the reason I say that is because you got Cantlay at 9,000, you got Finau at 8,800, you got DeChambeau at 8,700, Stenson 86, and Fleetwood at 85. There's so many guys around there that are going to soak up some of that ownership. And he seems to always be overlooked. And he is one of those guys, he doesn't have the greatest course history, but as far as the key stats going, and again, don't get me wrong, his course history is not bad.
Yeah.
As far as he's 25th in the course history at TPC Boston in my model, 14th in the corollary courses, and wow, the last 24 to the last 12 rounds he's played, definitely trending upward. So, and he's a scorer. We know that guy can go out and just light it up. He's not the best putter, but when he gets going, man, he puts up some big numbers. So I like him this week because I think you're going to get that lower ownership.
I mean, based off of the last 12 weeks, I'm using a week model versus a round model, right? So the last 12 weeks, Matsuyama's, he's number 2 in the field in approach. He's top 25 in putting. He's number 2 in par 5 scoring. and he's number 15 in birdies or better. So again, when you talk about guys that measure up, his course history is decent. It's not fantastic. He's one of those guys that I think if you wanted to make some changes to your lineup to give you some benefits as far as game theory goes and ownership, he's a guy that could give you that. But again, you never know. Because he's been talked about so much by us, by Mayal, by all the guys out there, you could see ownership gravitate up because everybody's looking at the same data points.
Yeah, possibly, like I said. But with those names like Finau, like, where are you at with Tony? Tony's been our boy. He's basically, every time we start a lineup, Finau's that first guy that goes in. Where's Tony? He's always in that 8,000 range.
Yep.
He's always one of the top scorers, hasn't let us down. Even when he had that struggle a couple of weeks ago where he went out and just barely made the cut but shot like 10 birdies in that round. It was absolutely crazy. He's always been there for us and just a core guy. Dude, I get the sense that you're kind of steering away from him a little bit this week.
You know, here's the thing for me with Finau. I've played him basically every week that he's been in a tournament. He's always shown up. He always scores. He may finish, T15 or T20, but when you look at his DraftKings points, he's going to score points like a guy that finishes inside the top 10. Last week he finishes T2. He puts up 110 points. He just has a phenomenal week. And again, this course lines up for him and what he does well. I think he chipped 2 balls in off the greens on Sunday, and so like his scrambling metrics were off the charts, right?
Yeah.
So again, there's things about him that he does well. I don't think there's anything that penalizes him as far as course layout or how he projects and playing the course. For me this week, when I think about ownership, when I think about scoring, when I think about trying to differentiate, if I can find myself getting away from Tony Finau and going into and pushing more shares into Matsuyama or into DeChambeau or into even Stenson or Fleetwood, I think you're going to get some ownership benefits from that. Don't get me wrong, I'm not going to completely ignore him because the metrics for him have been off the chart and I will not go away from that. But he won't be a massively over-owned core guy for me like he typically is in my lineups.
Yeah, and the one thing with him, yes, he's been scoring, but I don't feel like I get win equity with him. He's only won one time on the tour. He's been competitive, and he scores great, but I never get the sense he's going to win for us. So at that value at $8,800, again, you can expect some decent scoring, but I don't know. Top 5 to me is always out of the range. He's not going to hit that, and you're not going to get any win equity with him. But again, I
totally agree.
I can't ignore him totally. So I'm with you. Great pivot. If you get off him, you got other guys that we just talked about, and I think he'll be highly owned because he always is. And the week's coming where he's gonna have that off week, and if you were able to pick that week, man, look out. The leverage you have on the field would be tremendous. So
absolutely. What about there's kind of a funky range that lies at the high sevens. It's kind of capped out by Paul Casey at $7,900. Paul Casey, if we were having this conversation 4 weeks ago, at $7,900, you and I would both feed in Paul Casey in every one of our lineups. He finishes, T60 last week. He'd missed a cut the week before. There's been some lingering injury issues. Ever since his win, he's kind of been a little bit of a roller coaster for people where Paul Casey had just been a set it and forget it guy, right? So I'm curious, Paul Casey at $7,900, is that a case where you're buying low, or are you going to continue to sell at this point and say, look, until I see that form turn, I'm not going to invest a lot in it?
Well, $7,900, like you said, he's been a staple of many of my lineups, and it wasn't. What was the tournament where he kind of blew it on Sunday and lost to Bubba? And ever since then,
was it the Travelers? Because Bubba won the Travelers this year.
Yeah, so it might have been that. But
okay.
He had that huge lead going into Sunday, kind of blew it, and he hasn't been the same since. And I still been riding him, but he's let me down. But at $7,900, and you look at his course history here, he's number 4 course history wise, and number 2 in the corollary courses for me in my model. He's number 26 on my model, and where he's lacking is the last 12 and 24. And I saw some signs that he was coming back last week, but he kind of tanked on the weekend. He had a good Thursday, so Friday, and then went away. But at $7,900, I think I go back to him. That's a great price, and I think the ownership won't be there where it
the
usually
typical
is.
Paul Casey ownership. Yeah. I mean, the thing that's interesting is you've got a number of guys at this range that it's an interesting play. Paul Casey we've talked about. Louis Oosthuizen at $7,800. Brent Snedeker at $7,800. Gary Woodland at $7,700. Terrell Hatton at $7,700. Those guys right there, there isn't a lot of win equity between any one of them, right? Snedeker won the Wyndham here 2 weeks ago, decided not to play in the Northern Trust, and is now here in the Dell. So the guy's coming off of a win, right? What do you do with this range? Based off lineup construction, do you think you'll be heavy in this range, or you think it's something where I'm going to circle on Paul Casey and where he fits in there, I'm going to play him? Or could you see yourself using a heavier volume at this level just because if you're going stars and scrubs, it's going to be hard to work in these guys?
Yeah, if I do go with the stars and scrubs, I'm definitely going to have to go into the 7 range. But we didn't even talk about the 8,000. We did a little bit with Patrick Reed, but Webb Simpson, Phil Mickelson, Billy Horschel.
Yeah.
Remember I just talked about him where he got hot a few years back and won the FedEx?
Yep.
And he's been pretty steady lately, and it's been a great year for him overall. And he's a sneaky guy. He's down there at 8,100. You got Mark Leishman in that 8,000. So you got a lot of these 8,000 guys. We talked about Fleetwood a little bit and DeChambeau. So I guess we did talk at the higher price point, but we got some of those lower 8K guys. If I go balance, which I usually do, I actually always do try to do with stars and scrubs, but then I always pull back and do my normal
balance lineup. Yeah.
And so if I go balance, I'll have more of those 8. But yes, you're right. If I go in the high, if I go with a guy above 10, I'm going to be dipping to the 7 range, and I'm not scared to go there. These guys are amazing.
Yeah, there's a few guys. If we go down to that next rung of pricing, right? You've got Bubba Watson, Aaron Wise, Kuchar, Zach Johnson, Poulter, Cabrera Bello, right? Mm-hmm. Guys that at certain points during the year have done well, and at certain points during the year have been garbage. Bubba Watson's won 3 times on tour. He's arguably going to be player of the year this year, and here he is sitting at $7,600, right? What do you do with Bubba Watson? One of the corollary courses that has been thrown out there is TPC Sawgrass, which is where I believe the Travelers is played, which Bubba won this year. It's a Bubba track. This isn't necessarily a Bubba track, but again, you talk about corollary courses, and there's a lot of similarities. Where Bubba struggles, obviously, he's got some trouble with putting, but off the tee, if he can keep that big slice in order, he's going to have some benefits from being long. Any interest in Bubba this week?
No interest from me. On my model, he's way down on the list, 89th on my model. And the reason being is, you're right, the corollary courses is the only place he's kind of popping in my model.
Yeah.
He's 23rd in that. His course history here isn't the greatest. The key stats, last 12 rounds and last 24 are horrendous. If I go look here real quick at his course history here, let me see why that's looking so bad. So T69 last year, cut the year before, and then he had T29, T29, T67.
So not great.
So not the greatest. And I don't know, something with him since he's gotten his last win, he just hasn't. I haven't seen that same Bubba. Of course, he's an elite guy. We know he can always, show up. But I'm gonna stay away from him. Based on, I'm gonna try to stick with the data, so to speak, with what my model's telling me, because I always go out my heart sometimes, and that's where I get burned. I'm gonna try to stick with the model, and that's telling me stay clear.
There's 4 guys in here that I want to bring up, and it's just I don't know if they're necessarily DraftKings plays as they are as much betting. So if you're in New Jersey or in Canada or you have a betting app, guys that I like from a one and done betting perspective, just based off of their odds: Keegan Bradley 100-1, Daniel Berger 110-1, Xander Schauffele 90-1. Emiliano Grillo 125-1, and then your buddy Stuart Sink at $140-1. So you see those guys. Keegan obviously has the worst round of his career maybe on Sunday. Throws up, I think, a 70-80, almost shoots 80. Takes himself completely out of contention after being just red hot fire on Saturday. Daniel Berger, who's been trending better. His course history is good here. He's 3 for 3. He's never missed a cut. Xander Schauffele, a guy who tends to play like dog shit, and then when everybody jumps off the wagon and he ends up at this price range, all of a sudden he shows up. Not a lot of win equity in any one of those guys, but again, Xander seems like a guy, if I was to hone in on one of them that could potentially make a run to compete to win, Xander seems like a guy that I might circle on. Any of those three guys from a DraftKings perspective that you like this week?
So Bradley, number 9, I'm a model. So obviously he's not been a guy I've played much this year, and I kick myself when I see what he does. But then again, you see what happens. But then you see on Sunday
so much at putting,
and then you see a Sunday, and you're like, okay, I'm glad I wasn't on him. But yeah, he's popping number 9, and at his price at $7,200, Stars and Scrubs. Here's a guy for you, man. He's just got his course history here. He's number 8, 29th in the corollary courses. Last 12 rounds, key stats, he's number 7, and last 24 rounds, number 22. Again, I don't know if I'll go there, if I have to go there, but if I'm looking in the low 7s, how can I pass that up? Xander, not so much. I have no problem staying away from Xander. Just something about him. I think his last, he was showing up for the majors. He shows up for those tough tournaments, which this is, but I don't know. Something's just not popping there, so I'm going to stay away from him. And then you talked about Berger. Yep. I've actually been playing Berger recently. He is trending up, and he can be an elite guy when he starts trending there. And I think his price is pretty damn good.
Yeah, $7,200.
Yeah, so he's 23rd in my model, another $7,200. So him or Keegan, I have no problem playing.
What about Kyle Stanley, a guy 2 weeks ago that I think everybody and their brother was on based off how he performed? I think he either missed the cut or finished, basically dead last after making the cut. I'm not sure where he finished last week. But Kyle Stanley, a guy, when you talk about approach, you talk about metrics, you talk about a guy who does everything well except putting, Kyle Stanley's one of those guys that traditionally rings the bell.
Yeah, we've played him earlier in the year, and obviously he's done well for us many times. Northern Trust coming off a 28th finish. He did miss the PGA, missed the cut at the PGA. Number 2 at the Bridgestone. 39th at the Open, and then a miscut there at the John Deere. So $7,100 for me this week. I'll stick to those guys we just talked about at $7,200. I want to mention something about Mr. Sink. And the reason we kind of talk about him a little bit. I have been off Sink. I've never played Sink. Tony's model's been popping with Sink all over the place, and I was off of Sink last week.
Don't blame me for your misplays.
So you were all over him, and last time you were all over him, he did great.
He did,
right, at one of the majors.
Yeah,
the last major, the PGA Championship.
Yes, he was phenomenal.
And then I looked at everyone's model. I can't just blame you, Tony.
Yeah.
I looked at some of the big players out there. Gup's Corner. I looked at. I don't think Mayo was having a pop, but these guys had him in their top 15.
Yeah.
So I went with them, and of course, the week I go with them, Stuart Sink turns into Stuart Stink. So you were talking about him again this week. I don't know where he's popping in your model this week, but I'm staying away from him.
Got it. So core guys for you this week. Go ahead and give me 3 or 4 core guys that you think you'll be heavily invested in this week. And when I talk heavily invested, I'm saying 50% or more this week based off of a 20 lineup construction.
Fleetwood, I do think Casey is going to be that guy at the 7,900. He's right there. And I probably will go to the Cantlay. There's 3 guys there. And Fleetwood.
You said Fleetwood twice.
Did I say Fleetwood twice?
Yeah.
Sorry, I lost my computer just went dead here, so I lost my data. So, those guys right around 9. And also I will play quite a few shares of DeChambeau.
So I'm similar to you. I'm going to end up, because I think Stars and Scrub is going to be the most prevalent form of construction this week, I am going to go very, very balanced. I may not go higher than Adam Scott. Adam Scott's one of those guys I'll probably be heavily invested in. I'm going to have a ton of shares of Hideki. I probably will have a decent amount of shares of Tony Finau, even though I said I'm not going to go Tony Finau like I typically do.
Normally do.
Guys that I'll probably fade Cantlay just because I think at his price I can't get there, and if I'm already paying up for Adam Scott, I can't do it with 2 guys. I love Paul Casey this week, and then I think down in those lower realms, I love Charlie Hoffman, got good course history, a guy that's won here before, and then of course a guy that I've been riding for basically the last 5 or 6 weeks is Kevin Na. He just has been lights out ever since his win. He's just been one of those guys that you can just play and forget, and at his price at $7,400. he's there's a lot of value at $7,400.
I don't have a problem with now. What about a guy that you never talk about who does great for you? I know you're trying to keep him a secret. You know who I'm talking about.
No, I don't.
Kevin Tway. Come on, Tway has been your guy, and he's always under own, and he's been killing it. Where's he at this week? What's he priced at?
Tway is priced an egregious, I want to say like $6,600 this week.
Oh my goodness! And I know you're going to have him in your lineups. So don't even kid the followers, okay?
Kevin Tway will probably find his way into a few of my lineups. I think the hard part for me is because I'm going to go more balanced, I'm not going to have to dip much lower than 7,400. Another guy that I like that I've been playing a lot of is Gary Woodland. He shows up well here. He's, I think, 5 for 5. He's never missed a cut at this course, which usually measures up for shit the bed candidate. Yeah. But I will say I do love Kevin Tway. He played here last year. I think he was T40. He's been doing very well. He had a couple shitty rounds last week, which basically derailed his tournament for him. But a guy who typically scores. His finish position isn't great, but he puts up a lot of birdies. He has the ability to hit the ball a long way. He's decent on approach, and he's okay in putting.
For that price?
For $6,600, yeah. If you're going to go out and get JT, he's a great guy to pair with JT and stay somewhat balanced.
I just want to mention him because Tony does play Tway, and I get mad when I don't play him, and I see him killing it. So there's a guy to keep an eye on.
Well, I think that about sums it up. Any last thoughts for this or projections for next week? We've got another condensed field. We're going to get down to 70 guys, so we're going to have no cut in that tournament. But any other thoughts? Ryder Cup. Are you excited for Ryder Cup this year?
I do get excited about Ryder Cup.
Are you more excited for football? Because football's started.
No.
And you're what, a Jets fan?
No, are you kidding me? Buffalo Bills all the way. You know what's funny is I've played fantasy football since I was a young kid. I was playing fantasy football.
Like back in 42,
back
43?
Back in the day, before it was all digitized.
Before lights and stuff?
But you know what? I enjoy fantasy golf so much better because you get 4 days of entertainment.
No, I agree, 100%.
2 days. So the only thing I'm kind of bummed about, this is the last cut week, and you could say it's really not a cut week, but there will be some key guys that get knocked out for this one. After that, then it's just a crapshoot, really.
Yep.
You just like to play the next 2 weeks. So I'm looking, after this week, I'm going to follow it, don't get me wrong.
Yeah.
But I'll probably be waiting around for that swing season, counting the days to get back in there again. The last 2 ones, I'll probably keep a little bit of skin in the game. But when there's no cut, it's just so random. You got to get so lucky to pick those right guys.
I agree. So it's harder. It's harder to win because everybody's got 6 of 6 through. Yeah. Unless you pick Louis and he WD before the tournament starts.
Yeah, right.
Well, that's going to do it for us. Again, we appreciate your time. We'll be back again next week. We may not be as heavily invested in next week as we are this week, but take a run. Reach out to us on Twitter at DFSJags. You can email us. I'll post the link here so that way you can see it. Send us an email. Ask for our models. Ask us questions. If you've got certain guys, leave messages in the comments of the video, and we will get back to you. Remember, the tournament is Friday through Monday, so you've got an extra day of preparation, an extra day to reach out to dum-dums like us and ask questions. Good luck this week, and we look forward to talking next week. Thanks, guys.